I lived alone for 6 years, 6 winters watching snow cover Honora's grave, 6 springs where wildflowers grew over the mound, and I couldn't bring myself to pick them, 6 summers of heat and dust and silence so thick it pressed against my chest like a stone. I told myself I preferred it that way. A man who lost everything had no business wanting anything again. Then that morning came, December of 1878, cold so sharp it hurt to breathe. I found 2 Comanche women dying in the snow on my land. And instead of walking away like any sensible man would, I brought them home. That decision would bring me face to face with the man who murdered my future wife. It would force me to kill again after years of trying to forget how. And it would give me something I never expected to find, a reason to keep living. The dawn broke gray and bitter over the Texas Panhandle. I rode out early to check the coyote traps along the north fence line. My Winchester Model 1873 rested across the saddle, barrel pointed away from my horse's neck. The rifle held 15 rounds in the tube magazine, plus 1 in the chamber. 16 shots before reloading. I kept it loaded at all times. Old habits from the war. They're the only things that keep a man alive out here. My name is Emmett Holloway, 42 years old, former Union cavalry under General Sherman during the March to the Sea. I watched Atlanta burn. I rode through Georgia, leaving nothing but ashes behind us. I learned what men are capable of when they stop pretending to be civilized. Now I own 47 Texas Longhorn cattle, 1 cabin I built with my own 2 hands, in a grave on the hill where I buried the only woman I ever loved. The wind cut through my coat as I crested the ridge. I pulled the collar tighter and scanned the tree line. Nothing moved except the pines swaying and the endless white stretching toward the horizon. That's when I saw it. Blood on the snow. Not animal blood. The pattern was wrong. Animals bleed in spurts when they run, drops scattered by movement. This was a drag mark. Something heavy being pulled across the ground. Something human-sized. I followed the trail for 200 yards, Winchester in my hands now, finger resting beside the trigger guard. The blood led to a cluster of dead mesquite trees, their branches reaching up like skeletal fingers against the gray sky. And there, huddled against the largest trunk, I found them. 2 women, Comanche, by their dress and features. The older one slumped against the tree, her left shoulder dark with frozen blood. The younger one crouched in front of her like a shield, an obsidian knife clutched in her fist, her eyes fixed on me like a wolf deciding whether to fight or run. I stopped 10 feet away, raised 1 hand slowly while keeping the rifle pointed at the frozen ground. Easy now. The young woman didn't move. Her breath came in quick clouds, her body coiled tight despite the cold that must have been eating into her bones. She wore a deerskin dress torn at the hem, her feet wrapped in rags that had soaked through with melted snow. Her hair hung loose and tangled, black as a raven's wing against all that white. But it was her eyes that stopped me cold, dark and fierce and utterly exhausted. The eyes of someone who had been running for a very long time and had finally run out of places to go. "Who shot her?" I asked, nodding toward the older woman. No answer, just that knife held steady between us. I studied the wound from where I stood. Entry hole in the front of the shoulder, fabric burned around the edges from close range. No exit wound visible. The bullet was still inside, which meant infection was already setting in. "That's a .44 caliber wound," I said. "Military pistol. Somebody with Army connections did this." I met the young woman's eyes. "I'm not here to hurt you, but if I don't get that bullet out, she'll be dead by nightfall." For a long moment, nothing happened. Just the wind in our breathing and the old woman's shallow, rattling gasps. Then a voice came from behind the young one, weak but clear as creek water. "He speaks truth, Ayanna. Put down the knife." The young woman, Ayanna, hesitated. Her grip tightened on the blade. Then slowly she lowered her arm. I moved forward and knelt beside the older woman. Up close, I could see the wound more clearly. The flesh around it had turned an ugly purple black, and I caught the first faint smell of rot. We didn't have much time. "My name is Hurrit," the old woman said, watching me examine her shoulder. "There are men hunting us. They put a price on my daughter's head. $100, dead or alive." I looked at Ayana. She stared back without flinching. What did she do to be worth that much? Hurrit coughed, a wet sound that worried me. "She was born beautiful. Among our people, that is a curse. Men cannot control their eyes, so they blame the woman who draws them. The wives grow jealous. The mothers grow fearful. They called her a temptation, a bringer of shame." The old woman's voice hardened. "She did nothing wrong. She simply existed, and for that, they cast her out." I'd heard that kind of reasoning before. Men blaming women for their own weakness. It disgusted me then. It disgusted me now. "Can you ride?" Hurrit tried to stand. Her face went gray with pain, and she sagged back against the tree. "I'll carry her," I said to Ayana. "My cabin's about a mile east. I can get that bullet out, but we need to move now." Ayana's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why would you help us?" Fair question. I wasn't sure I had a good answer. "Because it's my land," I said finally, "and I don't leave people to die in my land, not even strangers." I lifted Hurrit as gently as I could manage. She weighed almost nothing. All sharp bones and papery skin, her body wasted from hunger and cold and weeks of running. I settled her across Slate's saddle and steadied her with one hand while guiding the reins with the other. Ayana walked beside us the whole way back to the cabin. She never sheathed her knife. The cabin was warm when we arrived. I'd banked the fire before leaving that morning, and the coals still glowed orange in the stone hearth. Heat washed over us as I pushed open the door, and I saw Ayana's shoulders drop slightly as the cold released its grip. I laid Hurrit on my bed and gathered what I needed. Rye whiskey for sterilization. A pair of iron tongs I heated over the fire until they glowed cherry red. Clean cloth torn from an old shirt. A needle and thread made from horsehair, the same kind I'd used to stitch wounds during the war. "Hold her down," I told Ayana. "This is going to hurt worse than the bullet going in." The surgery took 20 minutes. Hurrit screamed once when I dug the lead ball out, her body arching off the mattress before Ayana pressed her back down. Then she went silent, her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might shatter. The bullet was misshapen, flattened from hitting bone. I dropped it into a tin cup with a dull clink. "You've done this before," Ayana said quietly as I stitched the wound closed. "War teaches you things you wish you didn't know." I wrapped the wound in clean bandages and made Hurrit drink a cup of water mixed with willow bark tea for the pain. Her breathing had steadied. The color was returning to her face. She would live, at least for now. As I washed the blood from my hands in a basin, I noticed Ayana staring at something on the wall. A photograph in a wooden frame. A young woman with honey-colored hair and serious eyes, wearing her Sunday dress with a ribbon at her throat. "Who is she?" Ayana asked. I didn't answer for a long moment. My hands had stopped moving in the water. "Her name was Honora. She was going to be my wife." "Was?" "She died. Back in '72. Fire took her." I turned away before she could ask more questions. "Some wounds you learn to live with. That doesn't mean you want to talk about them." That night I sat in my chair by the dying fire, Winchester across my knees, watching the shadows move on the walls. Hurrit slept fitfully on the bed, her body fighting the infection that had already taken hold. Ayana had curled up on a blanket near the hearth, but I knew she wasn't sleeping. Her breathing was too controlled, too alert, like a deer that knows the wolves are circling. Around midnight I heard them talking, low voices in Comanche, a language I didn't understand. Hurrit's voice was weak but urgent, almost excited. Ayana's responses were short, clipped, confused. I kept my eyes closed. Let them think I was asleep. But something in their tone put me on edge. It wasn't the sound of a mother comforting her frightened daughter. It was the sound of a plan being revealed. And somehow I knew that plan involved me. 4 days passed. Hurit's fever broke on the second morning. By the fourth day, she could sit up and drink broth without help. The old woman was tougher than rawhide, stronger than most men I'd served with during the war. Whatever she'd survived before finding my land, it had forged her into something hard and patient and dangerous. Ayana worked constantly during those days. She swept the floors with a broom made from bone twigs, hauled water from the frozen creek in buckets so heavy the cords stood out on her neck, mended shirts I'd let fall into holes and tatters over the years. She moved through my cabin like someone trying to earn her place in it, like someone expecting to be thrown out at any moment. I watched her when she didn't know I was looking, the way she flinched at sudden sounds. The old bruises on her arms faded to yellow and green, the thin white scar on her collarbone from a wound that had healed years ago. Someone had hurt her more than once, probably more than one someone, and she learned to expect pain the way most people expect sunrise. On the fifth morning, I rode into Bitter Springs for supplies. It was a nothing town, a trading post, a saloon with a sagging roof, a blacksmith shop, and a cluster of shacks that passed for homes. Maybe 200 people scratching out a living in the shadow of the Panhandle's endless nothing. But it was the closest thing to civilization within 30 miles, and I needed medicine for Hurit's infection. Laudanum if they had it, carbolic acid for the wound. The moment I walked into Kaufmann's general store, I knew something was wrong. Heinrich Kaufmann was a fat German with a walrus mustache and usually a smile for every customer. Today his face was pale. He wouldn't meet my eyes. His hands shook as he weighed out the flour I'd asked for. "What's going on?" I asked. Kaufmann glanced toward the door. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "There are men here, Herr Holloway, asking about 2 Comanche women. They say one of them is worth $100 to the right buyer." My blood went cold. Who's offering that kind of money? Before Kaufman could answer, a voice came from behind me, a voice I'd know in the depths of hell. "That would be me, Holloway." I turned slowly. My hand drifted toward the Colt on my hip. Sheriff Cornelius Braddock stood in the doorway, blocking the light. 60 years old, gray beard like Spanish moss, a face carved from decades of hard decisions and harder living. I'd known him since the war, back when we were both young enough to believe we could make a difference. But that wasn't why my hand was on my gun. It was the man standing behind him, Colonel Hezekiah Crane. He looked older than I remembered, hair gone white as bone, face lined and weathered. But those eyes were the same, pale blue and cold as a January sky. The eyes of a man who saw other people as obstacles or opportunities, nothing more. "Emmett Holloway." Crane smiled, and it didn't reach those dead eyes. "I heard you were still alive. Thought for sure the winters would have killed you by now, or the whiskey, or the loneliness." I didn't trust myself to speak. 6 years of rage was boiling up in my chest, and if I opened my mouth, I might start shooting and never stop. "Easy now," Braddock said quietly, stepping between us. "Nobody needs to die in Kaufman's store today." Crane chuckled. "Still protecting strays, Cornelius? Some habits never change." He looked past the sheriff at me. "I hear you've got something that belongs to me, Holloway. 2 Comanche women. One of them has information I need." "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't insult my intelligence." Crane's smile vanished. "The old woman was an interpreter for the army before the Comanche Wars ended. She knows the location of a silver deposit her people hid during the fighting. I've spent 2 years tracking her down, and now she's sitting in your cabin, eating your food, sleeping in your bed." He paused. Hand them over and we can end this peacefully. The word peaceful in his mouth was obscene. And if I don't? Crane shrugged. Then I come back with 20 men and take them anyway. And I burn your cabin to the ground. He leaned closer, and I could smell the bay rum on his collar. Just like I burned Honora's house. Remember that night, Holloway? The screaming? The way the flames lit up the whole valley? Something in me snapped. I had my Colt half drawn before Braddock grabbed my arm. The sheriff was stronger than he looked, and he used all of it to hold me back. Not here, Braddock hissed in my ear. Not like this. He's got 5 men outside. You'll be dead before you clear leather. Crane watched the struggle with amusement. 48 hours, Holloway. Bring me the women, or I'll come get them myself. He tipped his hat. Give my regards to your guests. Then he walked out into the gray morning and disappeared. Braddock released my arm. I stood there shaking, the Colt still half drawn, my vision red at the edges. I know what he did, Braddock said quietly. I've always known, but he's got money now. Power, politicians in his pocket. Going after him is suicide. He admitted it just now. He admitted he killed her. And who's going to testify? Me? Against the man who owns half this territory? Braddock shook his head. I want to help you, Emmett, but I need something. Evidence, witnesses, something I can take to the federal marshal. I holstered the Colt with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Then help me find it. The ride back took 2 hours. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. Ayanna was waiting on the porch, knife in her belt, body tense as a drawn bow. What happened? Inside, we need to talk. I told them everything. About Crane, about the bounty, about the 48 hours we had before hell came calling. When I finished, the silence in the cabin was thick enough to cut. Hewitt broke it first. There is something you must know, Emmett Holloway. Something I have kept hidden. She pushed herself upright on the bed, and despite her weakness, her eyes were sharp as flint. I did not come to your land by accident. I watched you for 2 months before I let you find me. I know who you are. I know what Crane took from you. She paused. I chose you as my weapon because you are the only man in this territory with reason enough to stand against him. The words landed like stones dropped in still water. You planned this, I said slowly, from the beginning. I planned to find an ally. I did not expect to find a good man. That was unexpected. Ayanna stared at her mother. You never told me any of this. I told you what you needed to survive. Now I tell you the rest. I should have been angry. Part of me was. But beneath the anger was something else. Something I hadn't felt since Honora died. Purpose. Tell me about the man who put the bounty on you, I said to Ayanna. Tell me everything. Her story came out like blood from a wound. Slow at first, then faster. Ayanna had grown up different from other girls in her tribe. The elders said she carried bad medicine, that her beauty was a curse drawing men's eyes and women's hatred. She learned young to walk with her head down, to make herself small and invisible, to flinch before the blow landed. Stone Bear was the youngest son of Iron Hand, the war chief. He saw Ayanna at a summer gathering and decided she would be his. Not his wife, his property, a trophy to display. When she refused him, he laughed. He came to her lodge one night while her father was away hunting, drunk on stolen whiskey and wounded pride. He told her she had no right to refuse, that she belonged to him whether she wanted it or not. Ayanna waited until he was close enough to touch her. Then she drew her knife and laid open his face from cheekbone to jaw. Stone Bear survived, but he would carry that scar forever. A permanent reminder that a woman had defied him, had marked him, had made him look weak in front of his entire people. Iron Hand didn't care about the truth of what happened. He cared about honor. His son had been humiliated and someone had to pay. Ayana fled with her mother that same night. They had been running ever since. "So he doesn't want you dead for hurting him?" I said when she finished. "He wants you dead for making him look like a fool." Ayana's jaw tightened. "To a man like Stone Bear, that is worse than any wound." I understood. Men like Stone Bear and men like Crane operated on the same twisted logic. Power was everything. Anyone who challenged that power had to be destroyed, not because of what they did, but because of what their defiance represented. Hope, the possibility that things could be different. "He'll come," I said. "Probably before Crane's deadline. Warriors travel faster than hired guns." "I know." I looked at this woman who had fought back when fighting seemed hopeless, who had run when running was the only option, who had survived everything the world threw at her and was still standing. "Then we'd better get ready." We worked through the night and into the next day. I dug 3 pit traps in the approaches to the cabin, each one 4 feet deep and lined with sharpened stakes at the bottom. We covered them with branches and a thin layer of snow until they were invisible, just another stretch of frozen ground. Ayana helped me string barbed wire from my cattle fence across the main routes to the cabin. Anyone charging on horseback would hit the wire at chest height. It wouldn't kill them, but it would slow them down and make them bleed. Huret, despite her wound, taught us to make poison using sap from the oleander bushes that grew along the creek. The toxin wouldn't kill quickly, but it would weaken a man, make his hands shake, cloud his judgment. Every advantage mattered when you were outnumbered. By dawn of the second day, the cabin had become a fortress. Not impregnable, nothing was, but defensible. If they wanted us, they would bleed for every inch. Stone Bear came at first light. I spotted the dust cloud from the ridgeline around noon. 6 riders moving fast across the frozen plain, their horses' breath steaming in the cold morning air. I counted them twice to be sure. Stone Bear in the lead, his scarred face visible even at distance. 5 warriors riding behind him in a loose formation. 6 men total, against 2 of us and a wounded old woman. I was waiting on the porch when they arrived. Winchester in my hands, 16 rounds loaded and ready. Ayana was inside with her bow and 20 arrows tipped with oleander poison. Stone Bear stopped his horse 30 feet from the cabin. His warriors spread out behind him in flanking positions. Professional, disciplined. These weren't hot-headed young bucks looking for glory. These were killers. "White man." Stone Bear's voice carried across the distance like a war drum. "You have something that belongs to me. I don't see any property here, just people, and people don't belong to anyone." Stone Bear's hand drifted toward the rifle on his saddle. "The woman dishonored me, cut my face. Among my people, that demands blood payment. Among my people, a man who forces himself on a woman deserves worse than a scar." One of the warriors reached for his weapon. I shifted my aim. "Tell your man to keep his hands where I can see them, or I put a bullet through his eye." The warrior froze. Stone Bear smiled, a cold, empty expression that never touched his eyes. "You are brave, white man. Stupid, but brave. There are 6 of us. 2 of you. How do you think this ends?" "Let's find out." The first warrior kicked his horse forward. He made it 10 feet before the ground gave way beneath him. Man and horse screamed together as they plunged into the pit trap. The stakes did their work. The screaming stopped. 2 more warriors charged from the east, pushing hard toward the cabin door. They hit the barbed wire at full gallop. The lead horse caught the wire across its chest and went down hard, throwing its rider into the frozen dirt. The second warrior tried to veer away but tangled in the falling bodies. Neither got back up. 3 down, 3 to go. I fired from my position on the porch. The Winchester kicked against my shoulder, familiar as an old friend. One warrior spun from his saddle, a red mist hanging in the air where his head had been. I worked the lever, chambered another round, fired again. The second man clutched his throat and toppled backward off his horse. 5 down. That left Stone Bear. He came off his horse fast, using the animal's body as cover while he circled toward the back of the cabin. Smart, ruthless. He'd spent months hunting Ayana across the wilderness. He knew how to adapt. I lost sight of him behind the corner of the building, heard the crash of the back door being kicked in. Then Ayana screamed. I ran. Stone Bear was inside the cabin when I came through the front door. He had Ayana by the throat, lifting her off the ground with one hand while the other held a war club raised to strike. He turned when he heard me, using Ayana as a shield. Drop the rifle, white man, or I crush her skull. I let the Winchester fall. Stone Bear smiled. That scar Ayana had given him twisted the expression into something monstrous. You should have given her to me when I asked. Now you both die. Slowly. He threw Ayana aside and came at me with the club. He was younger than me, stronger. His first swing caught me across the ribs and I felt something crack. The second swing grazed my temple and the world went sideways. I staggered backward, crashing into the table. Wood splintered beneath me. I tasted blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my cheek. Stone Bear loomed over me, club raised for the killing blow. Any last words, white man? I spat blood at his feet. Yeah, look behind you. He didn't fall for it, didn't even turn his head. His arm came down, and Ayana buried 6 inches of steel in his back. The blade punched through his chest and emerged just below his heart. Stone Bear staggered. The club fell from his fingers. He looked down at the bloody point protruding from his body with something like surprise. Ayana stepped around to face him. Their eyes met. You came for me, she said, her voice steady as stone. Tracked me across hundreds of miles, killed to find me, all because I refused to be your property. Stone Bear tried to speak. Blood bubbled at his lips. Ayana leaned close. I was never yours to take. I was never anyone's to take. She twisted the blade. Stone Bear convulsed, his eyes going wide. This time the scar is permanent. She pulled the knife free and he collapsed at her feet. For a long moment, Ayana stood over his body, breathing hard, her hands trembling, but her eyes were dry. It's done, she said finally. The debt is paid. I pulled myself up from the wreckage of the table. My ribs screamed in protest. You saved my life. She looked at me. Something passed between us then. Not words. Something deeper. Now we're even. We had maybe an hour before Crane arrived. Hurit called me to her bedside while Ayana gathered weapons from the fallen warriors. There is one more thing you must know, the old woman said. She reached beneath her pillow and produced a leather pouch. Weathered and stained with age. Inside was a folded piece of deerskin painted with lines and symbols. A map. And beneath it, a brass badge tarnished, almost black with years. I held the badge up to the firelight. The inscription was still readable. Captain H. Crane, 4th Cavalry. Where did you get this? Hurit's eyes went distant, lost in memories of horror. In 1868, Crane brought his soldiers to my village. He said they came to negotiate peace. We welcomed them, fed them, trusted them. Her voice hardened like cooling iron. That night they killed everyone. 53 people, women, children, elders who could not run. I survived by hiding beneath the bodies of my family. She pointed at the badge in my hand. I took that from one of his soldiers, proof of who gave the orders. The map is nothing, a lie I drew to give Crane something to chase. But the badge is real. With it, you can destroy him. I stared at the tarnished brass. 6 years I had searched for evidence against Crane. 6 years of dead ends and false leads and growing despair. And here it was, in the hands of a dying woman I'd found in the snow. You were never the weapon, I said slowly. This was. Hurrit nodded. I needed someone with the courage to use it, someone with nothing left to lose. She met my eyes. I was right to choose you. Emmett Holloway. Crane's men appeared on the ridge as the morning sun cleared the treetops. I counted them carefully. 15 riders, hired guns in long coats, rifles across their saddles, pistols on their hips. Hard men with cold eyes and no loyalty beyond the paycheck. But as they got closer, I studied them more carefully. Some sat easy in their saddles, comfortable with violence. Others looked uncertain. Younger men, maybe, or men who still had enough conscience left to wonder what they were doing. That uncertainty was a weapon. I intended to use it. Crane rode at the front on a black stallion, wearing a tailored coat and a silver-studded gun belt. He looked like a gentleman rancher, not a mass murderer. That was the most dangerous thing about men like him. They could smile while they destroyed you. He stopped at the edge of rifle range. Smart. He hadn't survived this long by being careless. Time's up, Holloway, he called. Hand them over or we burn you out. I stepped off the porch, walked toward him with the leather pouch in my hand and the badge held high above my head. Everyone here should know something about the man they're working for. I let the morning sun catch the brass. Captain H. Crane, 4th Cavalry. I have a witness who survived the massacre at Sand Creek in 1868. 53 dead, women, children, elders, all killed on Crane's orders. This badge was taken from the scene. Murmurs rippled through the hired guns. Men exchanged glances. Hands shifted on reins. I have sworn testimony, I continued. Names, dates, details. Everything the federal marshal needs to put Crane on trial for war crimes. He's lying. Crane's voice cracked with fury. The man is a lunatic farmer with a grudge. Then why are you sweating, Colonel? One of the riders, a young man barely past 20, pulled his horse away from the group. I got nieces back in Kansas. I ain't working for no baby killer. Get back in line, Crane snarled. The young man shook his head. Go to hell! He turned his horse and rode away without looking back. Another rider followed, then 2 more, then 4. Anyone else? I called out. Anyone else want to explain to their families why they helped a murderer of women and children? More riders peeled away. By the time the exodus stopped, Crane had 7 men left, plus himself. Still bad odds, but survivable. Then hoofbeats sounded from the tree line. Many hoofbeats. Sheriff Cornelius Braddock emerged from the pines with 8 armed men behind him. Store owners, ranchers, farmers, men from Bitter Springs who had finally found enough courage to stand against the devil in their midst. Hezekiah Crane. Braddock's voice rang out like a judge pronouncing sentence. You're under arrest for murder and war crimes under federal jurisdiction. Crane's remaining men looked at each other, at the odds, at the choice between fighting and spending years in a federal prison. One by one, they raised their hands. All except Crane. His face had gone the color of old ash. His eyes darted between his betraying men, the sheriff's posse, and me, looking for escape, finding none. This isn't over, he hissed. His hand moved toward his holster. I built this territory. I own this territory. No dirt farmer and no washed-up lawman is going to... The Colt cleared leather, swung toward my chest. I was faster. The Winchester roared once. The bullet took Crane in the center of his chest, punching through silk and flesh and bone. He sat frozen in his saddle for a heartbeat. His eyes found mine, and I saw something there I'd waited 6 years to see. Fear. Then he fell. I walked to where he lay in the frozen dirt. Blood pooled beneath him, steaming in the cold air. His breath came in shallow, bubbling gasps. I knelt beside him. For Honora, I said quietly, for the 53 people you butchered, for everyone whose lives you destroyed to feed your greed. His mouth moved. No sound came out. I hope you burn. The light faded from his eyes. His chest went still. It was over. We buried Hewitt on the hill behind the cabin 1 week later. I dug the grave myself, next to the spot where Honora had rested alone for 6 years. It seemed fitting somehow. Two women who had suffered at Crane's hands, now resting together under the endless Texas sky. Ayanna spoke words in her language over the grave, a prayer for the dead, a blessing for the journey to come. I didn't understand the words, but I felt their weight. When she finished, I burned the false map in front of the marker. Enough people died for that lie, I said. Ayanna nodded. My mother would agree. Spring came early that year. The snow melted in March. The grass turned green. Wildflowers pushed up through the thawing earth. And for the first time in years, I noticed them. Ayanna stayed, not because she needed protection, not because she had nowhere else to go. She stayed because she chose to. And in the West, a woman's choice meant something. She found work as an interpreter at Fort Griffin, 20 miles east. Good work, honest work. She rode out 3 times a week and came back with stories about the soldiers, the settlers, the changing world beyond our little valley. I expanded the herd to 80 head, built a new barn, fixed the fence line I'd been putting off for years, found myself whistling while I worked, something I hadn't done since before the war. One evening in late May, Ayanna came home early. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, and she sat on the porch watching the light fade with her hands folded across her belly that had begun to round with new life. I sat down beside her. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Just watched the colors change and listened to the evening birds and let the silence be what it was. Finally, I reached into my pocket. The ring was silver, tarnished with age. I'd made it years ago for another woman, another life. I'd kept it all this time, thinking I would carry it to my grave. I've been holding on to this since Honora died, I said. Figured it would go in the ground with me. I turned it in my fingers. Lately, I've been thinking different. Ayanna looked at the ring, at me. Her eyes held something I hadn't seen in them before. Peace. I don't need you to save me, Emmett Holloway. I know. That's not what this is. She took the ring, studied it in the fading light. Then she slipped it onto her finger. I stopped running, she said quietly. For the first time in my life, I have a place where I belong. I pulled her close, felt her warmth against me, the new life growing between us. Then stay, build something here, with me. She didn't answer with words. She didn't need to. I lived alone for 6 years after Honora died. 6 winters of silence and grief and waiting for death to take me too. Then I found 2 women dying in the snow, and everything changed. Hurrit taught me that some debts can only be paid in blood. Ayanna taught me that some wounds can heal if you're patient enough. And the child growing in her belly taught me something else entirely. That even a man who has lost everything can find reasons to look forward instead of back. The winter was finally over. Spring had come at last. 2 weeks later, a stranger rode onto my land. He wore black from hat to boots, with twin pistols on his hips and a smile that held no warmth. He said his name was Ezekiel Crane, the colonel's younger brother, and he hadn't come to talk. The end.